Conflict is an inherent part of being human. It can be internal or external. It can be disruptive and can get really, really ugly. However, it can also be productive, deepen relationships, and promote openness. We'd like to start this session by asking you, what kind of a fighter are you? Do you avoid conflict at all costs? Do you feel that any criticism or disagreement is an attack on you? Do you hit below the belt and regret it later? Do you feel out of control when the conflict arises? How about withdrawing and becoming silent when you're angry? Do you store up complaints from the distant past? Well, at one time or another, most of us have done one or more of these things. That's because in most relationships, conflict inevitably arises and creates significant discomfort. If handled appropriately, though, conflict can actually strengthen relationships and improve our understanding of each other. To master conflicting situations and become a conflict resolver, we must ask, what causes the conflict?
Conflict is a tension that develops between two or more parties when they have some sort of disagreement, but ultimately it stems from a fear on the part of both parties that they have a need or a desire that is likely to go unmet. And that fear can then lead to anger, and that anger results in the conflict that we then see. Conflict is something that always occurs in the context of two parties. And when conflict isn't handled properly, the problem is that it can damage the relationship between those two parties. And that's why it's important to try to learn skills to help resolve conflict appropriately.
It is important to understand that feeling angry isn't necessarily a problem if that anger is handled constructively. The truth is that anger is a normal human emotion, just as normal as joy, happiness, and sadness. We want to help you manage your anger and other emotions better by teaching you how to be a great conflict resolver.
Well, to become a conflict resolver, you basically need to have, first and foremost, an intention to want to resolve the conflict, which seems obvious, but it isn't always the case. So that's important. You also have to have an awareness that conflict is arising because there's two parties with needs or desires, and they may not be the same. And so you have to be sensitive to looking for those needs and desires. And then you have to be willing to look for ways that the parties can meet those needs and desires in the most optimum way possible.
Fair fighting is a way to manage conflict and the feelings that come with it effectively.
Fighting fair is a concept that we use to try to help guide people into a healthy resolution of a conflict. And the idea is that there are a set of principles or things to keep in mind that help keep the attempt to resolve the conflict calm, clear, and kind. So number one, you want to be calm yourself so that your own tensions aren't rising. Also, you want to be clear. So you want to be clear with the other person what your own needs and what your own desires are. You want to use words to express yourself rather than actions, because when we slip into using actions to express ourselves, there's a potential for rising tensions. You want to be as specific as you can about what your desires are. You want to make sure that you avoid the desire to sort of clam up. So some people can become passive and allow another person to dominate situation, and that can somehow lead to a resolution, but it may not be the resolution you want. So you can't climb up, because otherwise you're not going to get your own needs and desires met. And it's important also that you take one issue at a time. If you start confusing the issue with a bunch of things that may or may not be related, it's less likely that you're going to get to a solution that you want. So those are things that you can do to be clear, and then the other main component is wanting to be kind. So there are concepts that you want to be mindful of in order to be kind. So for example, you don't want to do hitting below the belt, right? You don't want to say something that's going to insult somebody. You don't want to make a lot of accusations, because obviously that's going to increase tensions. You don't want to do a lot of overgeneralizing, using words like never and always, in the sense of you always do this or you never do that. You want to avoid make-believe, and by that I mean you want to avoid exaggerating your own desires or making up desires that aren't quite accurate in a sort of attempt to enhance a bargaining position or in some way manipulate the conversation. If you do that, you're likely to just distract from the true underlying issues that you really do care about. And another thing that we say is you don't want to stockpile, and by that we mean you don't want to hold in reserve a lot of past things that have happened that you're angry about to then bring out as a sort of weapon, because that's going to decrease the chances of resolving a conflict.